Diddly 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 doo. Yeah. So today, episode 35 of the NOTCAST, going to talk about U2's Rattle and Hum. And I started off with an appalling homemade cover version of Desire, which luckily only lasted the first few seconds. Since I normally do it by starting up by zooming in and then taking back, that's actually the album cover of Rattle and Hum. And today, talking about the four configurations of Rattle and Hum, which is a film, it's an album, it's a movie soundtrack, it's a live album, and it's a studio album, and it's a documentary as well as a live film. Right, we might need a map when we go through this to talk about it. But first and foremost, 27th of December 2020. Yes, I'm doing two in a day. I was talking about Star Wars earlier as the sun was going down. Now it's dark and I can't see. I'm going to talk about the U2 album, film, tour, best of. This might be actually a couple of episodes. I'm not quite sure yet. So effectively, autumn 1988 saw the release of a U2 single, Desire, and following swiftly on from that, the release of the album, Rattle and Hum, and the film, Rattle and Hum, as well, which was available in cinemas before being released to sell through VHS in early 1989. And this was a really unusual time for the band. I think first and foremost, the Joshua Tree had been such a big success, is that the band had the ability to do whatever they wanted, and no one was really going to question that, and they weren't quite sure what they wanted to do. So they came up with the idea of filming a documentary on tour, which was going to be a mixture of live clips and documentary stuff, and that cost them about £5 million. But they didn't have an overarching narrative, they didn't have a theme around it. Early part of the film was... and it cuts back to them several times. It's them rehearsing in, I think, at the rail depot in Dublin, which later became the Point, and then became the site, which is now the I think the Three Arena in Dublin. So if you've seen U2 at the Three Arena, you've seen U2 at the Point, but you probably know that, especially if you're in or near Dublin. And so rehearsing there's a section where they all sit around and they're asked a question. And for this, I will use the Gatefold single to pretend that you're watching the movie. Oh, what's it about? Said Phil Joannou, the film director, who was the least qualified of the people. Well, it's a musical journey, but sorry for the terrible accents and impersonations there, but it's a musical journey that doesn't tell you where it starts, doesn't tell you where it ends, doesn't tell you where it goes. It's just a bunch of live footage that's stuck together with a bunch of studio footage and some demo versions and some shots of them, just generally looking moody and mostly in black and white. Now, I think we'll talk about the album actually, as opposed to the film, and I think this is the first time in the band's career where I think they made a strategic miscalculation around what they should do next. And so, for example, they handily sidelined the idea of, well, how do you follow up an album that sold 10 million copies? How do you follow up something as big and as enormous as the Joshua Tree? And effectively, you create an album called Rattle and Hum that's almost like a scrapbook tour of new studio recordings and occasional live bits. And the idea is it's kind of like a mixtape from U2 of whatever on earth it is that they've been up to in 1988. The drawback is it's not a very good mixtape. I wouldn't do a mixtape like this because what you've got is you start off the album with Helter Skelter live in Denver. You then have 3 studio tracks. Then side 2 here is all live, apart from a 37-second extract of a song called Freedom for My People. Side 3 is new studio stuff. And then side 4 is God Part 2, Bullet the Blue Sky, live, and All I Want Is You. The track listing is terrible. The sequence it just doesn't sound in any way coherent. The way in which the songs meld into each other, the way that the album is structured, it is the worst U2 album. Now, I know I said October was the worst U2 album, but Rattle and Hum, as released, is my least favourite U2 album. It's the one I come back to the least. I've never listened to this configuration of the album since it was released. Even my 45 minutes, sorry, my C90 of recordings from the period featured one side live and one side studio. Now, really, the idea when they're originally talking about it was a double album that was part live and part studio, and everyone quite rightly said, well, that's going to be half a live album on one disc, and it's going to be a new studio album on the other disc, which is going to neatly sideswipe the need for anything else. But it's just, it doesn't flow. The first track on the album is Helter Skelter, which is, they're stealing the song back from Charles Manson. Thanks, but I don't think Charles Manson ever successfully stole that song away from anybody, actually, to be honest. I don't think that the brilliance of the Beatles' original version of Helter Skelter was eclipsed by the fact that a murderer used and recorded the song. But opening the album with a live cover version of the Beatles that was recorded halfway through a gig in Denver is no way to open an album at all. Especially when you've got Hawk Moon 269 as the last track on that side. Hawk Moon 269 is a great song. It's also ideal to open the album with, and it also opens the Live at Sydney TV special from 1989. It's a gentle sloping song that builds up to a crescendo. It's ideal to open the album with, and you put it at the end of side one. It's a terrible place for that particular song. So Hawkman should be the start of the album. Then you've got Van Diemen's Land, which is the second track, which is a solo edge vocal. And there's two versions of this. One was recorded in the studio in Dublin, and the other one was the kind of like rehearsal stroke demo that was recorded at the point. And it's Edge's solo vocal. It's just Edge and a guitar. And if you read the lyrics sheet for it, by the way, it has an extra verse that's not on the album. Still the gunman rules and widows pay, a scarlet coat, now a black beret. They thought that blood and sacrifice could out of death bring forth a life. It's not on here. Pretty weird. Always read the lyric sheets, by the way. Really fascinating things to do. If you are a train spotter like me, although I've never actually spotted a train. I once worked with a guy that was a train spotter. I asked him, what are you going to do when you've got all the trains? And he said, I don't know. So that was perhaps an existential crisis for a train spotter that I've caused. Sorry, but not that sorry, because I didn't like you that much, mate. Sorry. I was paid to hang around you. That was a very long time ago. The man used to ask me questions to try and catch me out, and I think he really hated the fact that I knew the answers to the questions. He was hoping that he could catch this young and ambitious boy-stroke man out, and it didn't work. That's another story, and again, naming no names and naming no places is probably the best thing to do around that. So Rattle and Hum, moving swiftly on, then has track 3, Desire. Desire is kind of like a almost like the Stooges 1969. It's a tub-thumping, raw, simplistic rock track with blood running through its veins and probably beer, and possibly, if it's influenced by the Stooges, almost definitely amphetamines, because they're a very druggy band indeed. But again, Desire should be second track on the album, Hawk Moon the first, and then shifting over in my preferred position to God Part 2, which opens with a similar beginning as the end of Desire. This is as a studio album, it is not well sequenced. It doesn't know what it wants to be, but what it knows it wants to be is some way of getting a new studio album out without any of the pressure of having to follow up the Joshua Tree. So it fudges it with half, or more correctly, a third live, 2/3 studio, and it's all a bit confused around what it wants to be. And also, if you're going to put out a live album, there's 1, 2, 3 songs which are already on major selling U2 studio records. So there's Bullet the Blue Sky, Pride, and I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. There's no need for these to be on here. People have already heard them. They've already sold millions of copies. And the 2 cover versions, one's Helter Skelter and one's All Along the Watchtower. So I'm going to move on, I think, a little bit from kicking Rattle and Hum in the corner as a studio album. It really should have been 2 separate and distinct releases, in my opinion. The first one should have been a live album called Rattle and Hum, recorded on the Joshua Tree Tour, released in the summer of 1988 in advance of the film. It would sell bucket loads, it would neatly avoid the need to have a new studio album out, it would satisfy the need for the live material, and you could then also hold back the live footage from that film, from that album, and use it as effectively an advertising point for the film. So this here, Joshua Tree, live at Madison Square Garden, double album, double vinyl that was released in the 2017 Joshua Tree box set, is probably the nearest thing to the Rattle and Hum live album that there is. And this is what should have come out actually in 1988, in the summer of 1988, 6 months or so before the release of Rattle and Hum. It's a double live set. It's not the full show, by the way. It doesn't have Bad on it. It doesn't have Spanish Eyes. It doesn't have The Unforgettable Fire. It doesn't have the cover version of the Beatles' Help, which were played at the show but are not on here. But what it does is a good live, strong double album from the Joshua Tree Tour. Maybe they could have chosen some different performances, but since you can't have Rattle and Hum, the film, the album, because you can't, this is probably as close to Rattle and Hum, the album, as you can get. Now, the film of Rattle and Hum had a number of extra songs that weren't on the soundtrack album. So let's see if I can remember where I've put my DVD. So here's a DVD copy of Rattle and Hum, readily available in most shops, probably deleted but very easily findable. And the film of Rattle and Hum is not well structured. I really don't like the structure of the film at all. Again, it opens with Helter Skelter. Halfway through a concert in Denver, it goes to some rehearsal footage in Dublin. It then goes through Exit, which is a deep, heavy song, but you're only 10 minutes into the film by then, and already Bono is exercising demons around that. You then go to a rehearsal of I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. You've got Silver and Gold. You've got a studio version of Angel of Harlem. Then you've got a ill-rehearsed first version of All Along the Watchtower for the first time that they've ever performed it. Then you go for a great version of In God's Country from Denver, but it's missing a verse. You've then got When Love Comes to Town and Heartland. You've got a live version of Bad from Denver that is pretty much the definitive version of Bad, I would have thought. Then you've got Where the Streets Have No Name, MLK, With or Without You, the Star Spangled Banner, Bullet the Blue Sky, Running to Stand Still, 5-song segment in colour from the Tempe Sun Devil Stadium at the end of the tour, and then back to black and white for Sunday Bloody Sunday and Pride. It doesn't feel like a show. It is not structured like a show. It pulls you in and out of concert footage every few minutes. It really feels like you're watching a first draft or a first cut of the film as opposed to the finished version. I watched it again this afternoon, and to be honest, I got very, very handy with the fast forward and rewind buttons. So I opened my version I watched of it today. I watched this now deleted Blu-ray version. For some reason, Paramount have deleted this. It's quite expensive now. I think I might talk about that. But I watched it by opening with Van Diemen's Land, then going to Where the Streets Have No Name, then In God's Country. Then I went to, I can't even remember now, Exit, Gloria, cut away from that. And then I just kind of shuffled the running order around a little bit to make it feel more like a show as opposed to what it is, which is it's a compilation of live footage that's put together without any real kind of structure, and it doesn't feel like if it's a musical journey. The musical journey doesn't start at A and go to B. It starts at D and then it ends up at K, but it goes via G, M, N, and O and P and Q. It's all over the place. I do not like this film the way that it is released, and I do not like the album the way that they're released. They don't make sense. There's no narrative, there's no structure, there's no flow around it. It feels like someone's almost treating the songs like poker chips or poker cards and just shuffled them and then thrown them out at random, and somehow you've ended up with this. Inside of it, as I said, 2 albums that should have been released. The first one should have been the soundtrack to the live material that's on here, called Rattle and Hum, out in the summer of 1988. And then maybe around about October, you release Desire as a single, you release the film, which contains songs which are on the upcoming album, so you have to go and see the film if you want to hear the songs for about 2 or 3 weeks. Then you release the album. And I think the album should have been called Heartland, and it should have been released around about early December, late November 1988. And that way you'd have 2 albums. You'd have the live album and you'd have the studio album, clearly demarcated, clearly broken up, and then bridged by this, which is, the Rattle and Hum live film. Now, the film hasn't been re-edited. There was talk about possibly re-editing it for the home video release. That didn't happen, and it never happened. There's been lots of deleted footage that's been released officially in the form of uploads to the director Phil Wanu's Vimeo page. So there's something like 13 live songs from Tempe, which you can download. There's lots of songs from Denver, which are on there, finished, edited, cut, mixed, ready for release. The only thing that differentiates them from the material that's on this is that they're 4:3 and they have a time code at the bottom of the screen. But you can really see that live footage is amazing, and not having it released is baffling. Now, I have a theory. One of the reasons why Rattle and Hum has not had a reissue in any way, shape or form is because it's all linked to the movie rights. So probably they invested £5 million of their own money into the film, and then they sold the film to Paramount Pictures for £5 million, and they probably sold the rights to re-edit or change or reissue it without the approval from Paramount Pictures. Now, Paramount Pictures, as I understand, thought it was at best a modest success and probably barely made even on the amount of money that it cost, and so therefore have no interest in releasing it or making it available as a deluxe edition on a Blu-ray. I think the special features on this, if it has anything, it's a trailer. It doesn't have the videos for Desire, it doesn't have any of the videos or All I Want Is You or any of the other live footage. It doesn't even have the version of One Tree Hill that's on the VHS tape of the best of 1980-1990. This is a dodgy bootleg DVD of the best of 1980-1990 that has One Tree Hill with a time code as one of the bonus tracks that's on there. So this is a real dog's breakfast of an album and a film, and I cannot be any plainer than that. I think the reason why we haven't had a deluxe edition of the album, the reason that we haven't had an expanded version of the album, the reason why we haven't had any bonus tracks, why we haven't had the live material released, all down to somebody not reading the small print in the contract with Paramount Pictures. And Paramount Pictures are probably sat there and going, mate, we really don't care enough about this film to put it out in anything more than a bare bones Blu-ray and DVD release. We really don't care about re-editing it. We're not going to cooperate. We're not going to find that footage for you. We're not going to let you do it. Which means that there's now a U2 album where there's actually probably more footage, more live footage than any other version that's just like languishing on a shelf somewhere at the Universal headquarters. And I really should have asked, actually, when I had the opportunity about that, but that went completely out of my brain at the time. I had absolutely no idea. My brain just went, it's really nice to meet you. I've seen you a lot in a lot of towns. And my brain should have gone, why haven't you released Rattle and Hum on Blu-ray? Or more correctly, why haven't you released a deluxe edition of Rattle and Hum? And that's not really how it works. So I've got a preferred alternate track listing for Rattle and Hum, which I'm going to put in the comments part of that. And I'd also like to point out, I asked quite a few of you on Twitter not very long ago, what your impressions are. There's a lot of love for Rattle and Hum. There's a lot of love for the film. There's a lot of love for the album. I completely understand it. Even people that really, really love this know that this is a flawed diamond in their discography. The live footage is phenomenally good. Those shows look amazing, and one of the people on Twitter said that actually, that Denver show, they were at the Denver show, and no film that they've ever seen has been able to capture how good the live performance is, but that Denver footage is very, very good, and I'm absolutely right. Denver on the second night, which is the one that's on here, in the main, is great. I fully confess to when I saw Rattle and Hum as a film, when I saw the black and white switch to colour for Streets Have No Name, and then when the song changes. And I'll explain, there's a brilliant trick in Where the Streets Have No Name, which I don't think I mentioned when I was talking about the Joshua Tree, which is that it's all toms on the drums. The drums are all toms, and then when Bono sings, when the city's flood and the streets turn to rust, and then you move down onto the snare, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of the verse, without you expecting it, because you've forgotten that snare drums exist, suddenly leaps up to having snare drums in it, and then all of a sudden the song just feels bigger and better. It's almost like when you have a key change, a standard key change in like a Pixies or a Nirvana song. You go up and you change key for the chorus, and then that makes the chorus stand out from the verse. And Where the Streets Have No Name does the same thing, but it moves from toms into the snare. And I was watching it, I was like, this band are on it. They are totally on it. And they're playing a great show. Now, whether they're playing a great show or not, I don't know. But on my television in 1988, it looked like they were having an amazing time, and I wanted to be there. And then there's also the version of With or Without You that has become legendary, which is the tempo version, which is the first time when I heard With or Without You with the Shine Like Stars coda on it. So early in the Joshua Tree tour, the band started adding an extra verse or a coda to With or Without You that is, we'll shine like stars in the winter night, we'll shine like stars in the summer night, one heart, one soul, one love. And obviously I can't do it justice, right? But it really closed the song. It's one of those things like the ending to Bad that's only performed live, is where the song becomes complete on stage with the audience reaction and that extra section that's in there. I was watching that and I was like, okay, I'm a fan. And of course, it had to be my least favourite U2 album was the one that got me into them. Life is Cruel. So, Rattle and Hum. I'm going to quickly go to another couple of things. So there's a section in case any of you have a copy of this, U2 and I by Anton Corbijn. I paid £8 for this. From Amazon many years ago. The cover shot for Rattle and Hum here, this is not a shot of the band in concert, by the way. This wasn't taken at a show. They didn't have any good photographs from a show, so they went back into a photographic studio in 1988 and they reshot it. Now that looks a little forced. It doesn't, it hasn't got the life in it that playing live actually does. Now, I don't think it's a particularly good photograph actually for the cover of Rattle and Hum, but I don't make the decisions. You can also see that the original version of it is far lighter than the version that's on it. Now, see, I would have thought if you were going to do the live album, that would have been the cover of Rattle and Hum, in my opinion. Should have been this photo here of a blurry edge and Bono pointing the light out at the crowd, and it's something that when they play Bullet the Blue Sky now, they also do something very similar, where he uses a light to kind of reach into the audience. Now I'm just going through some of the pages that we've got in the Anton Corbijn book, and whilst the band are recording, and then all of a sudden we're at the release point for Rattle and Hum, so none of this could be cover shots. And then you're into Actung Baby. It's a great book, but also if you want to have a look for it, you can find it for free online as a PDF. And I'm also going to quickly jump over to some comments that I've made online about the album, and I'm just going to revisit those while we're at it. Effectively, and I agree with me when I say this, effectively it is 4 releases in one. It's a live album, it's a studio album, it's a documentary film, and it's a live film, and all 4 of them are mashed up in a way that I think is not complementary in any way to the source material at all. Now, I think probably the harshest thing I can say about Rattle and Hum is it is basically a potato sandwich. I love sandwiches and I love potatoes. I don't love the two together. They don't work together. Absolutely not. Now, crisp sandwiches may be at a push, but not a potato sandwich. I can't be getting on with that at all. And there's a whole bunch of cover versions which that the band recorded around this time. Now, what you wanted to do with your musical journey was to, show the width and breadth of America, is that, go a little bit deeper. They've got B.B. King in there, they've got Bob Dylan in there, they've got a cover version of Jimi Hendrix, they've got a cover version of the Beatles. On the B-sides to the singles, they cover Patti Smith, they cover the Everly Brothers, they cover, what's it, the other song, I think it's Everlasting Love, all this type of stuff, and the Righteous Brothers, but they're not going deep into it here. at all. And I think that, if you're going to go deep into it, if you're going to go to people, don't just skim the surface and go, well, we'll have a bit of Jimi Hendrix, we'll have a bit of the Rolling Stones with Sympathy for the Devil and Ruby Tuesday and Bad. We'll have Jimi Hendrix. Get people to go, you should know this stuff, not that stuff. Everyone knows that stuff. Everyone, putting a Beatles cover version on your album, everyone's heard of the fucking Beatles, all right? Everyone has heard of them. You're not being revelatory by playing a Beatles cover version, all right? You're being obvious. You're being as obvious as going. It's like someone asking you, well, what's your favourite Beatles album, and going the best of the Beatles. Putting a Beatles cover version on your covers album, or as a cover version on one of your albums, you're going full Alan Partridge here. Obviously, I, with the hindsight of age and guile, can look back on the folly of youth and innocence, and I can say that. But even at the time, it felt to me a little obvious. And were I perhaps more familiar with the Beatles at the time, I would have gone, guys, this is an open goal here. You're drawing comparisons between yourselves and the Beatles, and nobody comes out of that good. Oasis spent a whole career trying to sound like Beatles songs you'd never heard, and I mean, obviously it worked well for them financially, but they became a band that was always known as being in the shadow of somebody else. So, I think it's, as I said, it's embarrassing to devote an album to America and not really grasp it. Now, when I went to America, and I've been a number of times, maybe not as many times as U2, I felt, this is a place that really only exists in movies. Before, it was like walking into a movie set, going into Chicago or Oklahoma or Vegas or something. It was like, walking in and you're going, okay, so I'm in a movie now. Walking down the streets in Chicago, and you go, well, that's the street that they had the first, the first fight between Neo and Agent Smith in the original Matrix. And you could look over and it's just casually, most people just walking because they're on their way to work after buying a coffee. It's nothing like that at all. The live material is on Rattle and Hum is fantastic. It is incredibly potent, and it should have been released. It should have been given an audio release. It should have been given an audio release as a separate live document, and then you would have been able to break it into two parts, with a live album and a studio album, with a 6-month gap between the two. The live album being the advert for the live film that's just about to come up, and then you're able to have the studio album as a separate entity that operates entirely on its own. And that's where I think it went completely wrong. And it's not something that was unique to U2. Depeche Mode were doing a very similar thing, and around about the same time, they were touring all over America. They made a film about that tour, but they actually released the soundtrack to the live material as the 101 live album, which again was a lot of people's entry point into Depeche Mode. And as I kind of mentioned previously, here's Led Zeppelin's The Song Remains the Same. If you've ever seen it, I'm really sorry for your loss. The live footage is very good, but the not live footage is the band dressed as wizards walking around or driving cars, or pretending to be men of the land, and it's awful. And I know that they would love to go back and re-edit that film, and they can't. So the director's edition of it, which is the newly remastered version and a 2-disc special edition, actually the only thing they could touch was remix the audio on that, so remix the live material so it sounded less of a compromise. And I suspect this is the same thing that we've got with Rattle and Hum, is that the band can't go back and re-edit the film. They can't present extra tracks. They can't do a deluxe edition with just the concert footage in. Otherwise, I think they would have done it. I really, really do. And some of the material from around about this period, which the band did have that was available, is phenomenal and really should have been on an album. So, for example, we've got the Angel of Harlem single here, which has got a room at the Heartbreak Hotel on the B-side. That is an album track that for some reason isn't on the album. And Rattle and Hum as a studio album is poorer for not having it on there. On the B-side of Desire, here we have Hallelujah, Here She Comes, which again, great song, should be on the album. We've got Angel of Harlem again as a 7-inch single. I could show you a few CD singles, but what would be the point of that? Well, I'm going to do it anyway. And moving on from that, though, let's say that the album as is in my opinion probably my least favourite U2 album, because it's a mixture of very good studio material and very good live material in a way that actually detracts from each one of them. Following on from that, the band got fairly busy in terms of their activity. They released a Rattle and Hum book here, which is a paperback, which is meant to be a revelatory insight into the band as it was, but realistically is it's a glossy tour program, really, in my opinion. It's not that amazing. Worth getting. Probably the first official U2 related book that there was. Also around about this time, Hot Press magazine, never want to miss a chance to sell you a U2 related publication, published Three Chords and the Truth, edited by Niall Stokes. Oh, hello. Oh, I've got a cat that's come into the room now. I might introduce you to him. No, he's gone. Oh well, he's a shy cat. But again, the Hot Press decided that they were going to republish all of the magazine articles and interviews that they had around about that time. Moving on from that into 1989, the first kind of thing which really you have is this here, which is the 3D dance mixes, which is kind of like a promotional 12-inch released around about the same time as When Love Comes to Town. It's got the remix of Desire from the 12-inch. It's got a slightly extended version of When Love Comes to Town and a slightly extended version of God Part 2 as remixes. Now, I say slightly extended. UK chart rules limited the number of songs and the length of a single to, I think it was for a maximum of 4 tracks and 20 minutes. And the CD and 12-inch configurations of the next single, which is When Love Comes to Town, here's a 7-inch version, limited it to having to edit some of those tracks down. And by the way, if you look at these here, the CD and the 7-inch have the same cover, but the 12-inch has a different photograph on it, which is again here a different photo. But I'll get to that in a moment. So 2018 saw the 3D dance mixes released or made commercially available of a sort for the first time. This is a sealed fan club edition of the 12-inch. So if you're a member of the U2 fan club in 2018, you were able to have the U2 3D dance mixes sent to you as a gatefold 12-inch with some art prints in. So that was the first time that it was available officially for sale, which is handy, but it nicely sidestepped the 30th anniversary of Rattle and Hum. So effectively, that 3D dance mixes 12-inch, which you had from them being a member of the fan club, was the 30th anniversary bonus tracks. As When Love Comes to Town as a 12-inch, and then the last thing that they released from that, and the last thing that they released in terms of new material, was All I Want Is You. This is a 12-inch single in a slightly unusual foldy outy packy type thing. I haven't opened this for years, so wish me luck as I go inside, which has the 12-inch single in here, inside a nice sleeve, and again has a 12-inch in the inner sleeve. That's probably not the original inner sleeve, knowing me. Again, no idea why they put this inside this strange and unusual cover. It's quite a nice little cover, but it's probably a way of just making it look a little bit more attractive. There was an extremely limited coloured vinyl version of All I Want Is You. And I really like the cover to this, by the way. And this cover is also kind of present on a promotional album which was released in about 1989 called U2 To Date, which has one song from each of the one song from each of the albums on a promotional best of. So this is effectively the best of U2 1980 to 1990 as a promotional single disc edition, which was designed by Ireland and put out to in-store play in 1989 to remind everyone of how good U2 were. Quite rare, this, and staggeringly I picked this up for about £4. I thought that was quite good value when I got it. Now that we're into 1989 and we're talking about Rattle and Hum, but that's not where the story ended. So the band didn't tour Rattle and Hum. They did a tour which was called Lovetown, and here is a 8 CD set of live shows from Lovetown. Lovetown only visited Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Europe, apart from Britain, and Ireland as well. So effectively, it was almost like, and as we saw with the 1984 tour, when the band went to Australia and New Zealand first, it was effectively a reprise of the previous tour. So most of the show was very, very similar to the Joshua Tree tour. And as you progress through the show, they added extra songs from the Rattle and Hum album. Now, this is an 8 CD set which features mixing desk recordings of 4 shows, all at the Dublin Point on the 26th, 27th, 30th, and 31st of December 1989. One of these shows, the New Year's Eve show, has been released commercially for download as part of the complete U2 box set in 2004. The band also published a self-designed cassette cover, so if you recorded the show as it was broadcast on radio, you had almost an official live U2 cassette cover that you could put in that. But this has not been officially commercially released, especially not as a physical product. But this is a way of getting all of those Dublin shows, those 4 shows, onto it. There was also a TV broadcast from Sydney. Now, as I've mentioned before, Rattle and Hum got a home release on VHS. This is the VCD, I think. Philips video CD from 1994. I have nothing I can play this on, but it's a nice thing to have. There's also a couple of other bits and bobs from around about the same period that are really interesting. So here's the album by Robbie Robertson and a single called Fallen Angel, I believe it is. Now, not to muck about, there are 2 fantastic U2 studio recordings on this album. One's called Sweet Fire of Love and the other one is called Testimony, which are effectively duets with Robbie Robertson and U2 almost as his backing band. Bono and Robbie trade off lines. It's as good as anything on Rattle and Hum, and if I had the power in the world to reconfigure Rattle and Hum as a studio album called Heartland, the songs Testimony and Sweet Fire of Love would be on it. They are as good as anything on Rattle and Hum. If you thought something like When Love Comes to Town or Love Rescue Me is really good, then you've got to listen to these songs, to be honest. They are the missing pieces in 80s U2. And if you're really into the train spotting side of things, Fallen Angel has an extended remix of Testimony on it as well, which runs for about an extra 2 minutes longer and has some unique musical parts in it. Now, that brings you to the end of the Rattle and Hum period for the band. And I've really raced through this period. In the comments section, I will put through my alternate track listing for Rattle and Hum and for Heartland, the 2 albums, which I much prefer. In my mind, Rattle and Hum is a compilation album from which I will take my preferred parts and rebuild it in a way that works for me. It's my least favourite U2 album. If just the studio tracks from Rattle and Hum existed as just an album on their own with a room at the Heartbreak Hotel and Hallelujah Here She Comes and maybe Sweet Fire of Love in there, you'd have a fantastic 12-song album that, in my opinion, would be easily the equal of the Joshua Tree. And if you had a live album, let's say it's recorded mostly at Madison Square Garden, but with some of the material from Denver, from Tempe, with Helter Skelter, with All Along the Watchtower, with Bad from Denver on there, that would be a phenomenal live double album that would be spoken about in the same tone as people talking about, the best Queen live albums. Oh God, what a lot of them there are. Or, the best live albums of all time, like, I don't know, James Brown, The Apollo, Iron Maiden's Live After Death, or Kraftwerk's Minimum Maximum. It would be regarded as, the definitive U2 live document. But it doesn't exist because U2 blew that chance. They had an open goal and they really screwed the pooch here by trying to do something that was a soundtrack to an album as a scrapbook, as opposed to thinking about it as a live album and as a new studio album. There are limits sometimes. Sometimes an artist does need somebody to go and push back against them and to say, no, what you're planning isn't actually that good an idea. I think U2, in retrospect, have realised that Rattle and Hum is perhaps not the best move they ever made. Talking about it in the book U2 by U2, here's a paperback edition of it. The band are fairly clear that it's not the best move that they ever made. And they say that, for example, Paul McGuinness is fairly clear that the album didn't quite work for them. There's something that went wrong in the post-production of the film where it became too self-reverent. The point of view of the filmmaker disappeared, and every shot was kind of improved by the band, was what Paul McGuinness said. And Larry said that movie was made by committee, the Politburo, which was us. The live stuff was extremely well done, and we didn't know what we wanted. By the way, on the paperback edition, page 260, if you want to check my references, because I know that there are some people that think that unless it's fully referenced like an academic paper, that a YouTube video doesn't count. Well, screw you, mate, because it's just my opinion, and I'm not writing academic papers. Okay, I'm not trying to change the future of the world. I'm not doing cancer research here and fudging the results. I'm just a dude talking about a band that he likes and a record that he owns. I don't need to fully reference things by academic standards. Absolutely not. Rattle and Hum, then, not the best move the band ever made. Live footage is amazing. Brought a heck of a lot of us into the world of U2. A lot of people watched it and were stunned by that. Made fans out of an awful lot of people that previously were just bystanders, really. I think the live footage is fantastic, and the film is just one re-edit away from being absolutely brilliant. The album should, as I said, should have been split into two parts. Should have been split into a live double that was released long before the film, and a studio album afterwards. But I don't get to make the rules. I only get to create the playlists on my own computer, and then that is how I will present it. I was going to talk about the next release in the band's career, which is the best of 1980 to 1990. I will come to that in a future episode, I think. And finally, the last thing I'm going to warm out is really, at this point, the band have become completely self-sufficient. They've become financially self-sustaining. Cannot overstate how important this is. The band no longer were working for anybody but themselves. They had that 13% of stock in Island Records. The value of Island Records shot through the roof as the result of some mega selling band called U2 that had released an album called The Joshua Tree that sold an awful lot. So much so that Island Records was worth about 300 million from being worth maybe 50 million. And when Island Records was bought in, I think, 1989, that 13% share that the band had in Island Records ended up being somewhere in the region of 50 million approximately. So, by not cashing in that 5 million of royalties in 1986, the band turned that 5 million into 50 million, and that changed their lives completely. I'm not going to pretend at any point that it didn't. The band now do things because they want to do things at the time that they want to do them. They get to be completely masters of their own destiny and answerable only to themselves around that. And I think it's really important to say that once you're once you're free from the financial restrictions in which most people live, in terms of you have to make money or something along those lines, if you've suddenly got a payday the business in which you're one of the five main people is worth £50 million, you've got a thing called fuck you money, which is if you're in a situation and you don't like it, you can say fuck you and walk out of it. And in almost every situation, having fuck you money is probably very, very useful. Obviously, the true test of strength is knowing when to use it and when not to use it. But U2 didn't have to do anything for anybody else, and nobody else could be their bosses. They became their own bosses, which is a wonderful way, I think, to end this. So they ended the 80s in a state of financial self-sustainability as masters of their own destiny, with complete artistic control, having learnt the lessons from Rattle and Hum. And at that point, that was the end of the decade. They had to go away, dream it all up again, and then that brings us into what will undoubtedly be the next episode, which is the best of 1980-90 and the Acton Baby album, which is probably going to take more than 45 minutes to talk about. Thank you very much. Again, comments, questions, anything like that, do let me know. Thank you for all your contributions on Twitter. I will ask more of you your opinions about the albums as we go along. But I'm going to quickly scroll through my Twitter feed now, because that is the kind of thing that people do. A lot of people absolutely love Rattle and Hum, completely understand that. A lot of people love the intro to Streets. A lot of people think that the studio tracks are a lot better than the live album. Ed says it's pompous and self-indulgent. Completely understand that, Ed, and you're right in many, many ways. And it's a real mixed bag, according to Alan Kelly. As he says, they're trying too hard to pay homage to the greats, and I think as opposed to being great on their own. a lot of people really like it. A lot of people have very, very fond memories associated with this album, but also at the same time, we're able now, 30 years later, to take a step back and go, it's not as good as it could have been. So I think that's about it, really. Good Crumble says some of my favourite U2 songs are on it, but for me, it's not an album. Which I think is probably the best way to describe it and to end it there. It's a great compilation release. It's a mixtape made by a band, and it's not an entirely great and successful mixtape. Next stop, Axon Baby. Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye.